Well, ladies and gentlemen, before I introduce Calvin Helin, let me just take a moment and tell you about the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. We are a public policy think tank. Here in Ottawa, we opened our doors in March. The purpose of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute is to make poor quality public policy in Ottawa unacceptable. Unacceptable to Canadians, unacceptable to opinion leaders, unacceptable to decision makers here in Ottawa and across the country. And we carry out this mission through publications. In fact, our speaker this evening, Calvin Helin, was co-author with Dave Snow of the very first paper that we published at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Free to Learn, which was a paper about Aboriginal post-secondary education. We're publishing about national security issues, immigration, defense, foreign affairs, and a whole series of things, everything that falls under the responsibility of the federal government, including obviously Aboriginal affairs, is the province of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And we're delighted to have Calvin here this evening to talk about his new book. Now, Calvin is, I think, well known to many of you in the crowd, but some of you may not know all of Calvin's impressive accomplishments. Let me summarize a little bit and say that Calvin is a best-selling author, an international speaker, an entrepreneur, a lawyer, and an activist for self-reliance, not only for his own people, but I think his message is addressed to people throughout the world. And I think that's one of the reasons why his book is receiving such attention, not only in Canada, but in the United States, and I'm sure that he'll tell you a little bit about that in the course of his remarks. He's a member of the Tsimshian Nation from the community of Laxqualam, pretty close, on the northwest coast of BC, just north of Prince Rupert. He's the son of a hereditary chief. He's a practicing lawyer and entrepreneur, and he's president and CEO of Eagle Group of Companies, LLC. He's president of the Native Investment and Trade Association, and he's a director of the Vancouver Board of Trade, of Geoscience BC, and the Canada-China Resource Development Foundation. He's received top 40 under 40 awards in both British Columbia and nationally in Canada. He's served as chairman of a recent Aboriginal trade delegation to China. I think the Grand Chief just mentioned that he was also on that trip. And he's introduced an innovative business model to promote long-term benefits to Aboriginal people from natural resource development. There's much more I could say about Calvin, but I think you're here actually to hear from Calvin. So I'm going to ask Calvin Helin to come forward and say a few words to us about this wonderful new book that he's written. Calvin.
Oui, Simgiget, Sagadam Hanoch, Smoigit, Lakiget, Gabawals. Brian did such a good job of introducing me, and I'd like to leave it at that, so thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Macdonald-Laurier Institute for their support for this book launch for me. They offered to do it, and Ottawa is a very important place. A lot of what I've written about has to do with policy, and I appreciate it. Brian is not only a supporter that way, I consider him a friend of mine, and I agreed when he asked me to be an advisor to the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I'm still not sure what that means, but I think it means something pretty weighty. I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal people of this territory, and I'd like to acknowledge the prayer that was given by my good friend Grand Chief Shanakapo, who is truly an inspiring leader in Canada. I see lots of friendly faces in the crowd, and I just I want to acknowledge a couple of people that Morris hasn't mentioned already. I see Senator Patrick Brazeau, who's an outstanding leader in our community, and Jack Blacksmith from the Cree, and of course we've been introduced to the delegates from Manitoba. I had quite a difficult time in writing the second book because what I found is there's really no information on the topic per se, as I wanted to focus on it. And so I ended up having to do a lot of research and do a lot of thinking. And what I learned from my first book, Dances with Dependency, was I learned that you cannot give people material things in the long term and expect them to do well. About the only thing you can give them is knowledge. The famous Apache chief Cochise said in one of his speeches, he said, "Speak straight so that your words go like sunlight to our hearts." And trying to reach people on an emotional level, for me, is a very important thing to do, because if they understand at that level, they will internalize the message I'm trying to bring. And the message that I brought in Dances with Dependency was that this economic dependency trap system is killing our people. You just need to look at all of the social pathologies that afflict our people. And you need to understand how those social pathologies are translated into human misery. How did our society shift from being a society where we, as our grandparents did, emphasized the virtues of self-reliance and swung towards government reliance? And what are the implications of that? And I realized it was only with the Great Depression in the U.S. that the first form of welfare was introduced. And introducing that form of welfare, FDR in his State of the Union address said we have to be very careful about this kind of thing. We have to be very careful about this kind of thing because he said it will destroy people's spirits. It will destroy the ethic of self-reliance in America. And I started to understand how, from that time to Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty, and the same thing is paralleled in Canada, we started to develop more and more expectations of government. And I'm saying all of this without a political axe to grind. I don't think it's right-wing or left-wing. I think it's common sense. Here we've done all of this with the best intentions. We wanted to relieve poverty, but the paradox of it all is that we end up locking populations of people like Aboriginal people into poverty. The paradox is that we end up keeping people into a mindset which I call the economic dependency trap. And so what my book is about is really about how to move from that position to what I call an empowerment mindset. And about a year and a half ago, I was appointed to the National Council for Welfare. My first activity on the council I thought might be to change the name. When my son was a teenager, he would say something was really welfare, and the translation meant that it was so hopelessly screwed up it'll never be fixed. And so I thought, well, that's not a good connotation, even though I know welfare had a different meaning. And so I thought, what about changing it to the National Council for Self-Reliance, or the National Council for Self-Sufficiency? Because what our policy should be doing is not locking people and enabling dysfunction and people to stay in a position where they're not responsible for themselves. What our policy should be doing is encouraging people to be self-reliant. And from what I say and what you hear about what I write, many people think I'm opposed to welfare. But I'm not. I think in a wealthy society, when we have unemployable people, like people with various kinds of handicaps, or for whatever reason they're unemployable, we should help them. We should also help people like single mothers who are trying to become educated so that they can be self-reliant. We should help them to with incentives. Instead of clawing back their welfare if they have a job, we should maybe top it up so that they do get an education and they can become valuable contributing members to society. And when I say economic dependency, what I mean is when your sustenance is based on somebody else contributing for you to either as an entity or an individual for your survival. And there are principles that govern economic dependency. They apply to everybody. The first principle is the greater your dependency on anybody or any entity for your survival, the less control you have over your destiny. And this is, of course, what's happened with Aboriginal people. It was specific government policy that was intended to make us dependent so they could control us. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the shoe is on the other foot. The Aboriginal population has become such an important demographic population in Canada that we need to start seriously thinking about how we're going to educate Aboriginal people so that they can carry some of the weight of the retiring baby boomers population. Since about the mid-1990s, this is the first generation that's had access to so much wealth or easy credit that we've been able to buy our children material things which we never had in our generation, either to live vicariously through them or to try to give them something we felt we didn't have. It's resulting in such a problem that psychologists call it affluenza. And that mindset of those kids, those young people, some of them are 40-year-old kids, by the way, is such that they end up with this huge sense of entitlement with the inability to be self-sufficient. And if you take their psychological profile, you would find out that their sense of learned helplessness and inability to cope, sometimes depression, matches up very nicely with somebody that's on welfare. So inadvertently, what we're doing in society, through not understanding how to deal with wealth, is where we're destroying a large part of our population. So I realize I don't want to talk here too long, though. As a failed fisherman and a lawyer, I would like to stand here for 3 days and talk. But I would like to thank all the people that came out tonight. It means a lot to me. I'm on a mission, and this book is going to sell 1 million copies in the U.S., and I'm going to launch this on a worldwide platform. And hopefully, if the stars line up and the Creator looks at things correctly, I might have the same impact that with this book internationally as Dances with Dependency had in Canada. So thank you very much for your attention.
So, ladies and gentlemen, now you see why the Macdonald-Laurier Institute is so delighted to have Calvin not only here this evening, but as a collaborator on our advisory council, because the whole point of a think tank, of course, we're prospectors for good ideas. We go out and find people with good ideas, and then we create an audience so that those ideas can be communicated, and that's how those ideas change the world. Let me, on behalf of all of you, thank Calvin, and I'd like you to join me in those thanks. On behalf of Calvin and on behalf of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. And I think the one person in the room, it's always dangerous to mention specific people, but the one person in the room who hasn't been mentioned from the podium, who I think deserves some recognition, is Tataru White, who's visiting us from New Zealand. He's a good friend of Calvin Helin's, and Tataru is here talking about some of the experience of the Maori people in New Zealand and the relevance that might have to Aboriginal communities and policy in Canada. And Tataru, we're delighted to have you with us here. Thank you for being here. That's the end of our official proceedings, ladies and gentlemen. Please stay, have another drink, buy the book, have Calvin sign it, and we look forward to seeing you at another MLI event very soon. Thank you again.